UConn has the #1 recruiting class in the country. You're locked on.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Make sure making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, I'd like to take a quick moment to ask for a small favor. If you're enjoying the content, please take a second to subscribe and follow wherever you listen to your audio versions, Apple, Spotify, wherever you do it, Amazon Music. It helps the show grow, and I genuinely appreciate your support. Every follow, every subscription, every download also helps generate more revenue for UConn's NIL initiatives as we donate some of our proceeds, 10%, to Bleeding Blue for Good. Also, charitable donations for Husky Ticket Project, 10% of all revenue. So 20% of our revenue goes to UConn in some way or the other through NIL and through some of the projects that they know and love. I'm proud to partner with them. Husky Ticket Project sends kids to games who are in underserved areas of the state of Connecticut, and that makes me super happy and proud to do that. So thank you for being a part of this journey with me and for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. Today, this is probably our last recruiting show of the year because we're getting ready to get into the 24-25 season and a potential historic three-peat. But we can't deny how exciting it is to talk about the future. And last night, we told everybody a few weeks ago that Jacob Furphy, the Tasmanian wing combo guard, 6'6", 210-pound kid, lefty out of Tasmania, that he was going to come to UConn. And we also were one of the first to talk through about how UConn was off a few players and really focusing their efforts on potentially bringing in a international prospect. So late last night, he commits. It's all over socials, and we really wanted to kind of come in today and talk through, what this means and how this sets UConn up to have the #1 recruiting class in the country. And the reason why I'm going to say that is because right now you have a 5-star in Braylon Mullins, you have a 5-star in Darius Adams, you have a 4-star in Reibe, and based on composite rankings, Jacob is somewhere between a 4 and a 5, so we're going to give him a 4-star because that's kind of the lower side. But by the end of all these ranking cycles, Eric's probably going to be a 5, and Jacob likely will end up being a 5 once we start to kind of really look at his game. And I think people really see him as that. I think in some cases, there are coaches that feel like he could be a lottery pick next year, regardless of whether he plays at UConn. So what does that mean? UConn's previous high in recruiting rankings was the 2023 class, which landed all which are champions: Stephon Castle, Solo Ball, Jaden Ross, Jalen Stewart, and Yusuf Singari. Steph is playing for the San Antonio Spurs and doing incredibly well. And the rest are searching for their second title, a third straight for UConn. So for me, this is a huge step forward in just for recruiting in general for the program. They're already doing an amazing job, but to get the #1 recruiting class in the country, when it's all said and done, it's always about getting better and evolving at different aspects of your job. And they haven't done poorly. That's for damn sure. But to say that we're the best at this for this cycle, it's another competitive edge that UConn has. And listen, I will say this. When I first started doing this show 8 months ago, even when we were winning a second national championship in a row, and we started talking about recruits and transfer portal and all this different stuff, I had multiple people in my mentions on YouTube, Twitter, etc., socials in general. Man, UConn never gets the best guys. They always have to bring in guys and develop them and blah, 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 blah. Well, now Dan Hurley is priding himself in not only bringing in guys to develop, but guys who he feels, talks about this all the time, the right guys from the right pedigree to deal with UConn's system. And we have a quote from Dan on Jim Tressel's It's About the Team podcast. Put this out a little before the show. I don't want to recruit talented players who will make us lose. Sometimes you evaluate some of the best players in the country, and you know they'll prioritize their own interests over UConn's. If you haven't listened to that interview, go check it out. It's a fantastic little insight into what UConn and also what Dan Hurley is doing on the recruiting trail. Post it, and I went immediately to YouTube, watched the whole thing. It's about a 15-minute interview. It's a really good insight into his practices, his upbringing, but that's particularly around like the 42-minute mark. He starts talking about the method of recruiting and how he'll take less talented players that have processing skills. He'll kind of leave the athleticism at the door if he needs to. And none of the guys he's recruited this year are bad athletes. It's just there has to be the combo. All of it has to make sense, right? And I think that's the biggest thing for him is he doesn't want the culture to be sunk because he's chasing the most quote-unquote talented team. They're good enough coaches to get these guys for where they need to be, and that is incredibly savvy of them and also aware. Dan and his staff, it's not like they can't grab the top 4 or 5 guys in that are ranked 1 through 5. If they wanted to sell their souls and kind of what their ideals are like, they could definitely do that. But nonetheless, this is a big deal for UConn because there's no more COVID years. You can't just grab a grad transfer to come in and plug and play. You're building from the high school level, which is what Dan wants to do anyway, not transactional, developmental. So that's why it's a big deal. So they're serious about creating a dynasty. They're serious about building a powerhouse program outside of what people perceive UConn to be. And they're willing to compete with the other top schools to do it. It also shows recruits that UConn is a place where they can grow, develop, and compete, not only for championships, but to get them to the next level. And not in a one-and-done factory. As some other schools, quite frankly, have literally flaunted. So when we return, let's go over and meet the players again in this historic class. Darius Adams, Braylon Mullins, Eric Reibe, and Jacob Furphy. All will bring a different piece of the puzzle and a little bit of buzz to the pack. We'll talk about them after the break. Looking to catch a UConn game live? There's plenty of great games to look for in November. With the Game Time app, it's easy than you think to get great seats and unbelievable prices. Whether it's last-minute tickets or you're planning ahead, Game Time has you covered with amazing deals and a clear view of your seat, so there's no surprises. And here's the best part. Use promo code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout, and you'll save $20 off your first purchase. That's right, $20 just for using Locked On College promo. Game Time makes ticket buying stress-free with their lowest price guarantee, so don't miss out. Download the Game Time app and grab your tickets and experience the excitement live. Remember, that's promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. All right, you're back on Locked On UConn, talking the number 1 recruiting class in the country, of which we just secured. If you go on a website right now and you try to see the composite ranking of 247 or on 3, you're going to see us at 2. And the reason why I'm saying it's the number 1 recruiting class in the country and it's consensus is because Jacob Furphy is an Australian Tasmanian player. So he doesn't go by the, the American U.S. recruiting services don't really rank him where he should be. And I don't mean that to kind of be cheeky or funny about it. Like he is literally a top 30 recruit. If he was playing in the States right now, he'd be a 4 or 5-star recruit easily. And if you look, he actually is ranked a 4-star recruit on 247. So the fact that they only have him at like 151 is like his number is kind of silly. And also it's not with what the comps of scouts and other coaches have said about Jacob Furphy. Kind of a hidden gem, working with the NBA Global Academy. So, but let's go back. First up, Darius Adams. He was the first to commit to this class, and he really set the tone for what UConn was building. If you start to look at some of the guys' profiles, they're all around the same size, with the exception of Eric because he's 7 foot. Darius is a 6'5" guard, super versatile. He can play on the ball or off the ball, which is huge. Remember, positional versatility. His ball handling, his ability to score on all 3 levels, his ability to handle pick and roll, his ability to kind of make decisions off that pick and roll of when he should pull up, when he should drive to the hoop, or dish off to teammates, or get all the way to the basket. Court vision are all next level. Defensively, he's a nightmare because he's got that size and that length. Again, we've been pretty spoiled around us here at UConn the last few years to have these big 6'4", 6'5", 6'6" guards. That's coming back. Defensively, that's what he brings to the table with that length. Darius is the kind of player who can be a leader on the floor, and you can see it with his tape. He's always making an impact on both sides, and he's always kind of talking to his teammates in a way that they feel comfortable. I know that sounds kind of like soft, but in a way that, like, it's like it's firm, but it's like you know this dude's not yelling at you. That's kind of what I mean. He's literally just saying, like, hey, we need to be here. And that's what Dan Hurley wants. And I know that that's what he wants from his guards on the floor, to be leaders, not just quote unquote point guards, but guards in general, because he wants guys who can do both things, that can shoot, that can drive, that can not just kind of facilitate the offense, but be a big part of how they go about doing their action and how they do their horn sets and other things that come about it. So that piece of the UConn backcourt is safe, and it's a big piece for the future. Then you could add this same comments with Braylon Mullins. This guy is coming from Indiana. He was an absolute basketball savant in Indiana, where everyone thought he was going to go to the Hoosiers, including myself. And I couldn't be more happy to be wrong. I wish I could name the podcast Happy to Be Wrong, because when you're okay with yourself and you make a prediction and it's wrong, and I don't care. Like I've wanted Braylon Mullins to be on this team since I started watching him play, but I knew that there would be some challenges. But as time went on, that Dan Hurley mojo, that Dan Hurley magic really got him to realize that this was the place for him to develop. So he's got an absolute quick release. And for you older guys that probably grew up with a dad who was a big Pistol Pete fan, that's what this kid reminds me of. I know it sounds so silly to call it to name him after Pete Maravich, a guy who averaged like 43 points a game in college before they had a 3-point basket, but he's deadly deep from three, deadly accurate. And it's like, it doesn't come from the hip. That's where he got that nickname Pistol Pete, like down here. But it's like, it's on the way up. It's very Steph Curry-esque, because it's not like he's bringing it back here. There's an upward motion from there, and he gets it off incredibly quick. He's also 6'5". So when he gets that hard dribble and jumps up, it's really difficult to defend, because he's kind of beating the player to the spot. Jerry West used to talk about when he would do his pull-up jump shot, he would take that one last hard dribble, and that would always kind of propel him, and nobody could guard him, because by the time you're trying to beat him to the spot, he's pulling up for his jump shot. That's what this guy is like. So I've just given you two of the oldest references of all time, Jerry West and Pistol Pete, but maybe the old heads will love it. I think this kid is going to be a fan favorite, not only because of his shooting prowess, but he just is like a dog out there. He doesn't give up on a play. He is incredibly gifted with his footwork. I saw him on a defensive stance where a guy beat him to a spot, but he actually kind of recovered and was able to get in front of him, create a deflection, and kind of led to an easy transition bucket for one of his teammates. So it's not just about how much he's going to score. It's about what he brings to the table, both offensively and defensively. And he's 6'5". So size, speed, shooting, the ability to play defense. Again, there's that buzzword, positional versatility. He can be the point or he can be the off guard. Love it. And I think he can be instant offense. So if he doesn't start from day one, he can be that spark off the bench that gives you 12 points like that. Now we get to Eric Reibe, 7-footer from Germany, who we interviewed. One of the most impressive teenagers I've ever spoken to in this type of medium, where, they don't know what I'm going to ask. They have zero idea if it's going to come across okay. He was very media savvy for his age, and that just shows me the type of pro-ready confidence that he has. And not arrogance, because when I asked him about like his comps, which was Porzingis, and how he's working out, how that comparison kind of is around about where he wants to be, not where he is now. I think that was kind of really telling. How about the talking about turning adversity into opportunity? Those are things that you hear Dan Hurley say in interviews, because he wants guys that will have that same mindset, and Eric certainly does. So he's developing defensively, but offensively, he is far more advanced than, say, a lottery pick that we just put into the pros and Donovan Clingan, because he can shoot it from distance, he can post, he can slip on screens, he can also pop out. He creates so much spacing on the floor for his teammates. I think he's going to be a joy to watch and really kind of keep the flow of what I've said is UConn's offense is aesthetically pleasing. It's not a rock fight any night of the day, any night of the week. You're always going to get their best shot, because they have multiple guys who can beat you. And Eric kind of adds to that list and adds another layer to this offense with a 7-foot stretch 4-5 that can kind of shoot it from deep, but also dominate down low. I think some of the questions people have about him is he tough? I think he has that toughness in him. I think they're going to build on that. I think he's going to gain a little weight. It's not for a lack of trying. He's definitely working out in the gym. He went over his routine. And, shout out to Eric and his team for making the time for us. And we really appreciate that. Finally, and maybe I'm going to make a claim, the most talented of this team, of this group, just based off of where he's playing. He's playing in Australia, and he's Tasmanian. He's the latest addition, Jacob Furphy. He's 6'6". Most have him as a small forward or wing, so technically he would be undersized there. But you know how Dan Hurley is. He will give a couple inches in positional size to get a guy like this who is likely going to be a lottery pick. Watch him shoot. It's one of the smoothest left-handed strokes you'll ever seen. It's effortless. It's here, and it's perfect. There's no chicken wing elbow out a la Tayshaun Prince. There's no wasted energy. He looks like Joe Ingles. He kind of plays like Joe Ingles. And if he can be a Joe Ingles type player at UConn, I mean, sign me up. The guy that, Joe has been a 10-year NBA vet. He's a fantastic shooter. He's a big-bodied guy. I don't think Joe's like 6'8", 6'9", but still similar type player, lefty. He's not afraid to let it fly. And watch him in transition. The ability to get out on the break and get the ball up high on kind of ripping through and getting up to the basket was really impressive. I think he's a good ball handler, so he could run the point at need be. 6'6" point guard. Does that sound familiar, Steph Castle? I just think it's going to be another huge addition that he has all of these guys that are interchangeable. So what does Dan Hurley want? He wants guys to come in that want to compete, that want to earn their spot. And that's what is there. I remember Eric saying something that the availability of minutes, yeah, they're available, but you got to earn them. And I think that's something that is kind of lost in the shuffle now with recruiting, is like you kind of almost promise these guys they're going to play. They got to earn it and earn it on the court past some of these, veterans that are going to be back. So Furphy's versatility gives UConn a lot of flexibility, and that's going to be valuable with all of these guys come next season. When we return, let's talk about what we're in the middle of, the foundations of a dynasty. Coming up after this. What's up, NFL fans? You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get that hunch in the middle of a game, you can check your phone and view the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on that same page where you place your bets. Yeah, it's seamless. It's live. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you're a new customer, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So go check it out. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, you're back on Locked on UConn. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, talking about the foundations of a dynasty. Now, I don't say that phrase lightly. We are in the midst of a back-to-back national title. What UConn has done on the men's side here is put themselves in a position from this year to next of having the opportunity to do something that hasn't been done since the UCLA teams of John Wooden. And if you look back, the class that was ranked number 4 with players like Steph Castle, Solo Ball, Jalen Stewart, Jaden Ross, Youssef, and then to have a number 1 class to back it up is, and by the way, the no slouch of Liam, Ahmad, and Isaiah was 8th. So it was a top 10 recruiting class. They also didn't need 4 guys last year. So that kind of their ranking probably dropped a little bit. I also think Isaiah got screwed a little bit. He should have been a 5-star. So again, all these rankings are subjective. However, these rankings are close enough where you can kind of see what the momentum is. And to top it off with the 25 class being number 1, it's really just not about the rankings. It's about building a roster that has depth and that has versatility and championship potential and pedigree. So the challenge is going to be for Dan Hurley, no matter what happens this year, who stays, who goes, and which guys are going to make that next leap, right? he was talking today, I believe to John Rothstein about Aiden Mahaney and how he needs Aiden to be somewhere in the middle of Cam and Tristan for them to have a legitimate shot at winning a national championship. And I think we have talked about that since the jump. When Aiden transferred here, this was a guy that I felt like could be that in between, because he is kind of an in between of those guys. He is a guy who can handle the point like Tristan. He's a guy, and Cam could a little bit too. He's a guy who can come off the screens and hit pull up and hit 3-point shots. He can get to the basket. Is he as dynamic as those two? We'll find out. I think he's gonna learn. I think we saw a glimpse of it in the URI game in the exhibition of what his potential could be. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that in these bye games and then eventually with Maui. But yeah, that's a key indicator. He also talked about how Jaden Ross has kind of flipped the switch and has made the biggest leap along with Solo. How Jalen needs to kind of step up and be on their level, which is also really interesting because when we came into this season, we were all thinking Jalen Storr is going to be the next guy. And that may just not be the case. Not this year, at least. He's definitely still going to play. He definitely has his place. I don't want anyone to think that. But I'm saying as the next guy that takes that next leap where we're like, whoa, he's all Big East or, et cetera, maybe getting a potential lottery pick. But all of this stuff is all of the recruiting stuff we talked about. It all kind of backs up to the players that are on the team now and then eventually who's coming in. And so with the team that we have presently constituted, if the things that Dan is talking about stay on that same trajectory, then you wonder about Youssef, if he's going to stay for his third year and not having played a ton, or does he do Apostolos' route where he transfers to a smaller school and starts? By the way, Apostolos was 8 for 8 in a scrimmage that Richmond played and had 22 points. So pretty damn good. You're welcome back anytime. But yeah, I mean, it's sad to say because these guys are really cool and they're a part of the UConn culture, but if they don't end up getting minutes, they leave, and that's okay. It's so you wonder if Jalen Storr doesn't get the type of minutes that he thought he was going to get, and maybe again got to earn them, but in his mind, we're hypothesizing. If this is something, hypothetical where he doesn't get what he wants, does he end up leaving next year? It doesn't hurt the culture, doesn't hurt the team or any of that stuff, but at the end, does he, do they have that conversation, that honest conversation? We'll see. And that's where having multiple guys that are talented to come in and push the other players is very important in the foundations of a dynasty. Don't forget, if guys leave, and we're not just going to rely on freshmen, there will be transfers. Maybe one, maybe two like last year. But in the 23 season, with coming into 24, the one transfer was Cam. The year before it was Tristan. This year it's Aiden and Terrace Reed. So both those guys have a couple years of eligibility. So really, what I'm interested in is how this team is going to look in the next couple of years. Are they going to continue to have that same trend that Dan Hurley kept, which was, I did a show called UConn won the transfer portal because they retained all of their players. Does that happen again? Obviously minus Apostolos, but guys who his big class, right? His number 4 recruiting class. So does that history repeat itself? I think we're trending in that direction. I don't think anyone's going anywhere, but if my instincts are correct and Jalen has a tough time this year, he may be one that transfers. That's my thought process. I don't want that. I need everyone to understand that. I really don't want that. I want him to stay. I want him to thrive here. I want them all to thrive. But there's only one ball and there's only 40 minutes. There's not 48 minutes like an NBA where you can kind of give a guy 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there. So Dan Hurley has a really tough job right now. And I'm sure he's enjoying the hell out of it because of how much I know he loves developing these guys. But you got to love to hear Jaden Ross is balling. Got to love to hear, the comments around Aiden, kind of because those public comments are there to make sure he pushes and he doesn't get complacent off of the 17-point outing against a 10 team. So, guys, this is the number 1 recruiting class in the country. Don't anyone tell you otherwise. 4 absolute program changing players in one way or the other, from a 7-foot guy who can absolutely stretch the floor, can do dribble handoffs and do things that every Euro 7-footer you've ever seen. Again, think Kristaps Porzingis. Then you have two of the best shooters in high school with Braylon Mullins and Darius Adams, the top two shooters in the class. That's number two. And the third is, thumbs up. And then the third and fourth guy is Jacob Furphy, who's a 6'6" silky lefty wing who can play some on the ball and obviously has the ability to get to the rim and is a dynamic shooter as well, over 42%. So this UConn team has the foundation that is positioning itself to stay not just competitive, but push for championships every season for the next 3 or 4 seasons. But let's focus on this year. On the next show, we're going to talk through some of the position battles and hopefully get some insight into where we stand with a couple of the beat reporters. This has been another episode of Locked on UConn. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, asking you to stay locked on, stay connected, make sure that toughness meter is always rising. And as always, go Huskies.